Welcome to Author Stories, the podcast where we talk to the best writers in the industry and discuss writing and the creative process. Whether you're a writer, a reader, or both, we hope you'll find something here that makes you love books and the writers that create them. You can find archives of all of the great conversations I've had with authors over the years at hankgarner.com. Take some time and browse around there. I'm sure you'll find a new author to love, find inspiration for your own creative life, and find a new story to get lost in. Let's thank some sponsors who make the show possible. Vedic by K.J. Heritage. The dead don't always die. Top company scientist Chin Jelinek has committed suicide. Vedic, a half-alive empath with no memory of who or what he is, will die in 6 hours if he can't find out why, or so the company tells him, an added incentive to get the job done. Our hero soon discovers he is one of the skilled, a genetically enhanced human revered and despised in equal measure, a bloodhound with a terrifying past who'll stop at nothing in his pursuit of the truth. And the skilled always get their guy, don't they? Vedic, number 1, by K.J. Heritage, on sale now. There's a link to it in the show notes. K.J. Heritage's uncanny sense of pacing and story puts him at the forefront of today's speculative fiction writers. Gritty, intense, and compelling, Vedic is something you don't run into often enough in sci-fi, a cerebral thrill ride you don't want to end. Prepare to lose sleep reading Vedic, delicious science fiction. That's what other people are saying about it. Find out for yourself. Vedic, the first book in the series by K.J. Heritage. Jasper T. Scott. His box set Dark Space, the complete series. This is 6 books bundled together, on sale now for 99 cents. 6 complete books, over 600,000 copies sold. More than 2,000 pages of epic space opera for the low price of 99 cents. Also available in Kindle Unlimited if you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber. Humanity is defeated. 10 years ago, the Scythians invaded the galaxy with one goal: to wipe out the human race. Now the survivors are hiding in the last human sector of the galaxy, Dark Space, once a place of exile for criminals, now the last refuge of mankind. The once galaxy-spanning Imperium of star systems is left guarding the gate, which is the only way in or out of Dark Space, but not everyone is satisfied with their governance. Freelancer and ex-convict Ethan Ortain is on the run. He owes crime lord Alec Barandi 10,000 souls, and his ship is badly damaged. When Barandi catches up with him, he makes an offer Ethan can't refuse. Ethan must infiltrate and sabotage the Valiant, the Imperial Star System's fleet carrier which stands guarding the entrance of Dark Space, and then his debt will be cleared. While Ethan is still undecided about what he'll do, he realizes that the Imperium has been lying and putting all of Dark Space at risk. Now Brandi's plan is starting to look like a necessary evil, but before Ethan can act on it, he discovers that the real plan was much more sinister than what he was told, and he will be lucky to escape the Valiant alive. Grab all 6 books for 99 cents right now. Dark Space, the complete series by Jasper T. Scott. The Unwelcome Trilogy by R.D. Brady. Survivor, Mother, Leader, and Humanity's Last Chance. Deep within the remnants of the United States, Lila Richards oversees a camp of 200 survivors. In a world where living is an everyday struggle, and only through banding together can people survive, the arrival of the unwelcome only made her job harder. Riley Quinn and Miles Jones have been raised by Lila for the last 5 years. They're also one of the cursed, the children between the ages of 13 and 18, whom the unwelcome kill on sight. No questions, no pleas, just death. Protecting one another and the people of their camp is ingrained in all of them, but now each of them faces increased danger as the reason why the cursed have been targeted by the unwelcome slowly comes to light, and that truth will shock them to their core. Now time is running out, not just for the cursed who are being hunted down by the unwelcome, not just for Lila and her family who will face the greatest challenge yet, but for all of humanity. The world changed radically 35 years ago, but today humanity's very existence is on the line, and the fight has begun that will ensure its future or its annihilation. Fans of A.G. Riddle, James Rollins, Suzanne Collins, and Brandon Sanderson will love the Unwelcome Trilogy. Pick up your copy of the Unwelcome Trilogy on Amazon today. Thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today I'm really excited to have Janice Morgan on the show with me today. She has a fantastic new book. It's just released a couple days ago when you're hearing this. It's called Suspended Sentence. It's a memoir, and what a fantastic book. Welcome to the show, Janice.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you today, Janice, but we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, I think it started when I was a little child and my parents read to me. I remember in particular, both my parents read to me, but I remember in particular my dad reading stories to me, classic stories like Heidi or Black Beauty or Alice in Wonderland. And it just took me to a different world, I could make pictures in my head. And, when I look at those books now, I see that the vocabulary is quite elevated. And I'm sure I didn't understand all the words, but I could follow the story, and I knew it was a very special world that it was taking me to. And my dad loved reading these books with great relish, and just the way he would pronounce words, like in Heidi, Fräulein Rottenmeier, and just the enthusiasm he had for poetry. Sometimes at the dinner table, he would just take out a poetry book and start reading a couple poems, or reading Shakespeare. And I was just exposed to that level of language very early in my life, and I loved it. I loved the rhythms of it. I loved the sounds of the words, and I just, maybe when I grew up, that's why I wanted to study literature. I wanted to write and help create that kind of world for a reader.
I think there's something magical about when you hear a story or read a story and you don't understand quite all of the language. But there's something about listening and gaining context that helps you to understand things you don't understand. I think that's something that we lose track of when we want to make things accessible to everyone, and I understand that. But there's also something about elevating things to a point that makes the human mind engage and try to figure things out. I think that's also an important part.
Oh, yes. And, I later became a language teacher because I studied French, and I realized myself, and I also told my students, look, you don't have to understand everything. Like when you go to a foreign country and you hear the language spoken there, you may be very limited in your ability to understand based on, the way you were taught or the way you think a certain word should sound. And so when you engage in conversation with native speakers, they're going to pronounce words every which way, and they're going to have their own cadence and their own speech style, and you will have trouble following it at first. But, it's sort of like swimming, you just jump into the waves, and after a while, you can start swimming. And it's like that. You just trust yourself. You're going to pick up a lot just from the context, just from expressions. Even though you don't understand every single word, you're going to get the gist of it. And the more you learn, the more you give yourself that time, the more you will understand. And that's how you learn, it's just being in the context and picking it up. But it's hard for people because a lot of times once people reach a certain age, they feel they should have, linguistic control, and it's all about control and mastery. And we don't like to feel insecure, we don't like to feel thrown into the waves, It's a scary feeling, but but it's also very stimulating and fun, and you sort of have to just get used to that.
Right. What part of the world do you come from?
I come from Minnesota, really. My parents are from the upper Midwest, and so that's kind of, that's where I'm from. They're of European descent, and I am, now I live in a region that's kind of what you would call the Mid-South. And I guess that's what you would call, I live in Kentucky, so it's the Mid-South. So it's a completely different culture. But I've been living here for 30 years, so I've gotten used to it. And I think it's always interesting to live in different places because a lot of things that you take for granted, you realize, well, no, people don't think that way. They have a completely different perception of things. And it's based on their heritage and what they've been taught, and it's based on that cultural context, not on the one that I necessarily came from. So I think it kind of opens your mind and makes you realize, well, there's more than one way to look at things,
Yeah.
And that's helpful.
Did teaching take you to Kentucky?
Yes. Yes, it did. But, the really curious thing, I found out, though, later in my life that my paternal grandfather grew up in Kentucky and later left. And so, in a weird sort of way, even though I've, pursued a completely different, career and everything, I sort of came to an area that is not far from where my paternal grandfather used to live. And, many of his ancestors settled in Kentucky. They were early sort of pioneers. And so I find that interesting, Sometimes your life follows you're not aware of, and you find out about them.
My maternal grandfather was from Kentucky and from Northwest Kentucky, and he worked on the railroad, which brought him to the Deep South, where I grew up. And I would always hear him tell stories of this kind of magical place in my mind, and very romanticized the way he would talk about where he was from, and that part of the country is very different now from, when he left in the 1940s and came south. And I think the economics of the place, has a great bearing on, some of the societal changes that have happened in time. Do you notice that as someone coming from the outside and coming in? Do you think you have any insight into kind of how the culture is changing in that area?
Well, I know one thing that sort of surprised me coming from the North, the kind of progressive, liberal North to the conservative Mid-South. I think people's attitudes toward the government are more hostile, and I was wondering, well, why do they think that? And I think it has to do maybe with just the legacy of the Civil War and the fact that, for a lot of people in the South, because a lot of their paternal and grandparents and great-grandparents for the most part have, fought in the Civil War. They have still a live memory of that period. And I think maybe some of the distrust of government and the reluctance to want to be taxed, for example, which up in the North is like, well, of course you pay taxes because you get this back in social services, and this is good, But for a lot of people in the South, no, they don't like taxes. They don't like the government telling them what to do, so there's this basic distrust. Now, I think that's carried through in a lot of what's happening with the loss of jobs, and the economy changing so radically. I think people are trying to adjust, but they still maintain this kind of distrust. So they don't trust politicians, and some of them don't even vote for that reason. And I just, I throw up my hands. It's like, but you have to vote. You're a citizen. It's very important that you vote. But I just think there are so many people that are just turned off right now, or have been, that they have not participated at the level that you would like to see. And I but some of it too is just people are struggling so hard now with 2 or 3 jobs, and maybe they have kids to support and they have a lot of responsibilities, and these may be people who don't have college degrees, and so it's not easy for them to maneuver in this economy now, which favors the people who have the money and favors employers and does not favor employees. But I think we're starting to see a movement now toward greater unionization, and there's a new movement, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, that are very interested in the working class and trying to raise the working class and raise wages and so forth. And I think we'll probably continue to see that movement rise, because so many people are beset and besieged now, and they know they're being left behind, and they're understandably angry about it, and they want things to change.
You mentioned earlier that you taught and teach language, and I know that you've also written about French culture and in various places, cinema reviews and things like that. What did you fall in love with first, the French language or the French culture, or can you separate the two?
Oh gosh, I think both at the same time. Because I think it's because I grew up in kind of a bland suburban neighborhood. It was actually good. I realized historically it was good, because I was in a generation where the economy was doing really well, and upward mobility was possible, and so people could own their own homes and their own cars and all that. But I grew up in always a new neighborhood, and it just seemed bland to me. And when I discovered European culture, I just fell in love with it. It was like, wow, this is exciting. This has history. This has depth. When you study French culture, you're studying centuries of development. And I wanted to travel there. My parents did travel there when I was in high school, and they would bring back stories of people they had met and places they had gone, and beautiful museums and cathedrals and castles. And I just absolutely fell in love with that and wanted to go and wanted to immerse myself in this other culture that had this rich tradition. I guess I felt that as this American living in this sort of new suburb of a large city, Minneapolis, and then later Indianapolis, I didn't have that. We just to me, it seemed like we had a more homogenized culture. Of course, I realized it's because I wasn't exposed to the diversity at that time of American culture. But that's what I felt. And so I pursued the language and studied abroad, and then came back and wound up in Kentucky teaching a lot of times students who maybe this was their first experience, or maybe they were the first ones to go to college of their family. And so I know a lot of the colleagues now, we would talk about that. And there was an excellent study abroad program at my small college, and we wanted to send students abroad. That was a big thing, to expose them to the world. And that is a great thing. I'm proud to have been part of that, because I just think it enriches anyone's life, no matter what your career is or what you do later. I just think it gives you a different mindset, It gives you a broader perspective and more understanding of the world, to have lived even for a short time in another place. It just changes the way you look at things. And I think it's so good if especially young people can do that at an impressionable age, because they'll carry that with them their lives.
So Janice, it seems to me that that you are a perfectly normal person, someone who has her own dreams and desires, and is living out those as best she can, and with an eye toward the wider world and helping other people to get a view of just how big and how great the world is, and just loving life, and making a difference in your small Kentucky community. But as we know from your new book, Suspended Sentence, everything was not all perfect. Give us a glimpse into what started happening that eventually became the basis for this fantastic memoir.
Well, I had a child, and I was married, and he was a great kid. You know, he had so much energy, and he was so smart, and just great imagination. But as he was growing up, both his father and I noticed that there were times when his behavior was just sort of out of control, and he would have meltdowns, and no one, we couldn't figure out why. It didn't seem to be for any particular reason. Maybe it was because he didn't get his way about something, but his reaction was so out of proportion to what would seem to be, the typical child's reaction that we thought, what is going on here? And I always felt like there was something physiological that was different about my son. And I would have been more alarmed about it, but it did seem, on the other hand, that he was so healthy and so robust, and he was learning. He learned everything very quickly, how to walk, how to talk, how to do all kinds of things, make stuff, fix things. And I always had this great confidence in his ability to overcome whatever was bothering him. But I think, later I was divorced, and then it was just the two of us, my son and myself. And I think when he started getting into 11, 12, 13, that age time, his behavior really became hard to comprehend. I had a lot of trouble. I would make agreements with him about when to be back home or when to do things, and it would seem that he would make the agreement with me, and then later I would find out he didn't do it, and suddenly, whereas before we had seemed to have a pretty good understanding with each other, he just suddenly became unpredictable, and also his anger. He'd always have been a sort of a contrary kind of kid. He would just get into his head, well, I'm going to do it this way, but he would eventually come around. But when he was an early teenager, he just would blow up. Just blow up and get ballistic about stuff, and would break things and just go over the edge. And it got to a point where we absolutely knew something was wrong. And I later came to find out that there was a good reason for all of this. It was because he had bipolar 2, which is it's a disorder. It's a brain disorder that affects brain circuitry and behavior, and causes the person to have these extreme reactions. It's basically like having a deregulated mental operating system. And so a lot of these behaviors, I think, were difficult for him to control and got him into a lot of trouble because it led to him self-medicating, he became addicted, and his behavior became even more problematic. And so that's basically the problem he has to deal with, and it's chronic, and you can learn to manage it. That's what you have to do. You have to learn to manage it. But it was a big shock for us because we had never heard about it. We didn't know that was anything that could happen to a person, It was just, so it put us on a whole different learning curve and, a massive challenge. And because of the trouble that Dylan got into later, it just turned, in particular me, I'll talk for myself, because by that time, I was divorced and his father was living further away, but I was like right there. I was right next to it. And I was just, I was dealing with all of the fallout. And it was tough. It was really tough to go through.
So there was, Dylan was arrested at one point. What, after having kind of witnessed this change and this metamorphosis, if you want to call it that, of how he was behaving and how this was affecting you, what did that critical moment do in your relationship, and how did it did it kind of shock you into, okay, maybe this is a bigger thing than I thought it was?
Oh, definitely, definitely. There's really two time periods. One would be around the time he was a teenager when he had the diagnosis, and another would be afterwards, like after the arrest, because we kept thinking, well, if we do this intervention, then like sending him to the program, the school, the special school where he went when he was 16 years old, you thought, well, that will help solve the problem. And but we found out that it in fact did not, that the problem was chronic, it was ongoing. So I guess for anyone else who's dealing with this, I guess I would just like to send this message that it is ongoing and that you are constantly having to deal with the fact that the person's behavior will be affected by this chronic illness, that they will have to learn how to manage it as best they can, and you will have to learn how to deal with it also. It changes your relationship to the person. And so I have had to learn how to distinguish in my son when he's doing well. What is his behavior like when he's well? And then when he starts kind of going off a little bit, then I have to be aware of that. And I have to not over-respond to that, but just, kind of realize, well, he might be getting sort of hypomanic now, or he might be veering toward more depression now. And I don't necessarily call it like that and confront him with it, but I'm just aware of it. I'm aware that, what his mental state might be. And, it's really important, I think, for the person who has something like that to be able to have a high self-awareness so that they can kind of reel themselves in, and have ways of taking care of themselves. They always call about self-care. I think that's so important to know, because even if you're taking meds, for example, there's times when the meds don't necessarily work, or, even with the meds, you might still be, because of your life experience, you might be drawn to become more excitable or more irritable about something, to overreact. And you just have to kind of realize, I'm kind of going over the edge here. I got to reel myself back in. There's ways to do that, and I think people have to learn how to do that. I compare it a little bit to we're all pilots, right? We all have our aircraft, and you get issued an aircraft at birth, but then as you get older, you might find out that the aircraft you've been issued has some fluky adjustments, and you just have to learn how to deal with those. That's just part of what you'll have.
Right. And through this journey that you went on, you and Dylan found yourselves really connected in a way that maybe you never had been before, and you got to have a front row seat for this entire process, this cultural process that's in place to deal with people with substance abuse problems, and it was not at all what you expected, was it?
No, and I'm very thankful for the drug court experience that he had. I mean, that was really great because I think it's so structured, and I think a lot of what the book deals with is both of us trying to deal with the situation, which is very volatile and difficult to deal with, and traumatic, and had been all along. I mean, I understand that my son probably has a lot of vestigial memories of different traumatic experiences. And I know from attending the NAMI family support group that people who have this frequently have PTSD experiences as well, just, trauma that they've had to deal with. But I think the drug court experience was excellent and gave each of us a path to deal with the issues with a peer group. Like he was with his peer group in the drug court arena, and I was with my peer group in the NAMI family support group. And we both had to do our own work, to recognize sort of, okay, what, given the situation, how can we best deal with it? And I started realizing that I had certain codependent tendencies. Like I was trying to overcompensate for certain things, and I was trying to reach out to my son and almost, over identifying with him and trying to help him out too much. Whereas he, for his part, had to do more for himself. And it was hard for me as a parent to know, okay, when do I step in and help him? And when do I step back and let him just struggle through it and maybe talk to his peers, but get support from outside myself? That I don't have to be his only link to, his only lifeline, because that's how I felt. And it's just an overwhelming responsibility when you feel that, like you're somebody's only lifeline. And so I had to learn to kind of let go. I had to learn to establish more boundaries in our relationship. And he had to learn sort of from other people in his group. Well, how do they deal with their difficulties? Everybody has difficulties. I'm not the only one here. There's other people dealing with similar kind of things, and how are they doing it? And, he had to go through that learning process. And I had to do the same thing with the other parents, because we all had similar, our kids were all different, but we had similar issues in our relationship. And so we had to figure that out too for ourselves. And so I think that's kind of an important part of the book, it's getting help, but from the right sources. And usually it's from a peer group who is dealing with similar kinds of things and maybe has a little bit more experience than you do. And so that's a really good way to get to deal with it better.
Right. I don't want to give away too much of the book because it's such a wild ride and it's such a great read. It is, and I want people to pick it up and read it for themselves. But at what point, Janice, did you decide that this needed to be a book? And did you, from the beginning, did you know this was going to be for public consumption, or was this something you were just doing for your own edification?
Oh, well, as my son went through some of the things he did when he was young, and as a teenager, I thought, oh gosh, this is so strange. I really should write. And I always took notes, and I wrote a lot to his dad. He and I were constantly communicating. I wrote a lot of emails, but it was all very private. And I never thought about actually writing the story, until my son was arrested. And I just thought, oh my God, it just pushed me to want to tell the story. And I'm not really sure, like you say, well, was it going to be private just for you, or was it going to be something you go public with? I think in the back of my mind was kind of going public with it, but it was hard to get to that point because keep in mind, I was an academic writer, right? So when you're an academic writer, you do not, place yourself. You don't use the first person I, and you don't talk about your personal life. And so I was just not used to that. Not only that, I'm a very private person, and this is not something I ever thought that I would write about or share. But I think as I went through the experience, I just realized, hey, how could we have been so ignorant? I mean, I'm an educated person, and how did I not know about the fact that my son could develop bipolar too, and this would be like a major struggle. How is it that other people don't hear about this? So I thought, well, this could help other parents. Maybe I just need to write this. And so I tackled it. And I think that's basically why I wanted to make it public, because I just felt, this should not be hidden. This should be something that people talk about. And I realized that people were uncomfortable talking about it. They did not want to address this. But I think there's a lot of people now in jails who do have mental health issues. And it's because nobody diagnosed, nobody knew that they have this going on and that they need medical treatment. And they need medical treatment rather than being incarcerated. And so, how can you be silent about this? You want the younger generation to get the help they need earlier, and for the adults around them to understand, what's causing their behavior, the underlying issues, and that's what needs to be dealt with. People don't need to be punished. They need to be helped, and getting them the right help is, I think, our challenge today. We have to get beyond some of this, this reticence to talk about mental health. And fortunately, it's happening all around us. I mean, I'm really excited. Even with the time I started writing this, which was in 2014, now in 2019, I think we've seen almost a sea change, in the amount of articles and news stories on mental health issues. It's coming into the mainstream now, and I think that's so healthy and so overdue.
Right. Janice, one thing that struck me about the book was the range of emotion. This is very heavy subject matter. It could be very dark. In some points of the book, I do feel the darkness bleeding in. But one thing that I loved is that there are also moments of levity, and there are, anyone that's been through a traumatic thing, like, my wife and I have been through some medical things with our kids, and invariably there's some dark humor that crops up. It's kind of our way of coping and dealing with things, and some of that crops up in this book as well. How important is it for you to show the whole range of emotion and to not let this just be this deep, dark character study of, the darkest parts of humanity?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you mentioned the humor, because so far, to my knowledge, no reviewer has mentioned the humor, and I kind of felt like, oh gosh, as a writer, I wanted that levity to be there, because it's part of my personality, it's part of how I approach life. I mean, believe me, if I didn't have a sense of humor, I wouldn't have survived all that stuff, and I wouldn't be surviving it now. I think humor is very, very important. It's a way of getting through extreme difficulties. It's not something I just added in. It's something that was there, and it was in the approach. But I definitely wanted the reader not to be, like you say, not completely shut in this deep, dark place. Because, there's a lot about the disorder itself, bipolar 2, that is hilarious. I mean, it's really funny. The dreams and schemes and the tilts and turns, the ups and downs. It's not all dark. I mean, some of it's really razzle dazzle, and it can be dangerous, but it can also be extremely funny. And I wanted to bring all of that into the book. Dylan's visions for himself and his crazy dreams and schemes. I think that's important. And I just the way the mom reacts, and the way she conceives herself too, as being dragged into certain things or railroaded into certain things that she realizes are probably not the smartest thing in the world, but she's going along with it because it just makes it easier in the moment, kind of thing. And so all of that was part of the story, and so I wanted the reader to feel that as well. And I also thought of the reader in terms of, I don't want them to feel enclosed. I want them to feel like this is opening up onto things. And, how does the mother find, this is myself, the mom, how do I find some peace of mind, even in the midst of the fray? Because you can't wait for the peace of mind to happen. Like, someday my life's going to be calm. Someday my life's going to be great. I mean, I used to tell myself that when I was younger, like, someday, then I'll have my job, then I'll have plenty of money, then I'll have, I'll be happy, I'll have this, I'll have that. And it's like, no, I mean, you have to be happy today, even if it's just for a few minutes, even if it's just for an hour, it's like right now, this is your life, enjoy it. You grab the moments that are there, that are calm, that are sustaining, or that where you have a real connection with your partner, or you have, connection with some friends who understand what you're going through and laugh with you at some of the funny stuff that happens, Maybe some people think that, this is a group of people who are always sad and in the dumps, but no, I mean, most of the people are very resilient and love a laugh as much as anyone else, and they'll grab it whenever they can.
Right. Well, the new book is called Suspended Sentence, a memoir. Janice, this book is fantastic. I hope everyone gets a copy of it, not only to get a glimpse into your life and your journey, but I think we can all learn a lot about ourselves and the people around us by getting to look through your eyes for a little while. If people are just learning about you, is there a place online where they can connect with you and learn more?
Sure. I have an author website. It's www.janicemorganauthor.com. And there you'll find more information about the book, Suspended Sentence. And, for example, I give resources there, especially for young families or families who are looking for information about mental health and ways to get help to their young people. I also have discussion questions in case anyone would like to have a book club and discuss this with people who've also read the book. And all that's available on the website. And also, you can contact me. Readers read the book and you want to contact me, there's a page where you can do that. And I'll love to hear from readers just to see what their reactions are.
Excellent. We're going to send everyone to send you, Janice. There's a link to the book in the show notes of this episode. We'll also put a link to your website in there. This has been so much fun talking, Janice. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Now stay tuned for an audiobook excerpt from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
I was 10 years old when I saw my first ghost. The year was 1770. My father was a barber. He kept a small shop at the Couenhoven Inn, where the King's Road met the Old Loop. Our modest home lay to the north, between the inn and the hanging tree. A simple box of pine boards whitewashed with crushed oyster shell, one room with a spinning wheel for mother, a chair for father, and up a ladder of branches, a garret where my parents slept. I slept on the floor below, alongside my little brother, Hans, 5 years younger than I. Our floor sloped toward the Hudson, so that when Hans rolled over in his sleep, he often went on rolling and couldn't stop, collecting splinters and grievances. Yet on this particular night, he slept peacefully, and I was the fitful one. A mouse had taken shelter in our wall, fleeing the October chill. It scritched and scratched, nibbling a nest for itself. The sound thrilled me. I possessed a vivid mind, full of toadstools and bullfrogs and lightning storms, and so imagined a skeleton writhed in the wood. The bones of Anne Underhill, perhaps, murdered by Indians at Spook Rock. I'd heard that tale from my father, who reveled in the Dutch superstitions. He would gather us to fireside on winter nights and spin tales of the Heer of Dunderberg, that storm king who rattled our white windows, of the Lady of Raven Rock, who died in snowfall, pining for her lover, of trolls beneath the penny bridge and hobgoblins in the hanging tree. He'd filled my head with such dark romance that I lay waiting for Anne's little finger bones to drag me off to some bloody fate. I rather hoped she would. A cloud cleared the moon, and a square of light fell on my mother's spinning wheel. The sharp spindle glinted, and the wheel began to turn, without touch. A figure appeared before me, as through a mist, a gray head bent to the work. She fixed me with eyes black as open graves and whispered in a low, guttural hiss, "Spin, or you shall not eat." I cried out and fell to my pallet, arms over my head. Hans awoke, lost his balance, and rolled away, bleating with pain as he struck the riverside wall. Father emerged above. "Agatha, what is wrong?" "There's a ghost, Papa. A ghost! Help me!" Hans laughed despite his bruises, and Mother moaned and ordered us to sleep. But Papa descended and took my hands, his blue eyes twinkling. "What did you see?" "An old woman. She said, 'Spin, or you shall not eat.'" "Oh!" He raised a candle beneath his chin.
You saw old Willow. She lived here long ago, when this was the home of Isaac Hart, our candle-maker. Her husband was killed by savages. Hart took her in at the request of Lord Phillips, who paid a token sum for her upkeep. But Hart was greedy, and kept the money for himself. He never fed her unless she spun. So Willow spun and spun and spun, like a spider, year by year, growing old and blind and falling to waste. She died at that spinning wheel, fell over one day, and the spindle pierced her heart. Hans screamed and hid beneath the table. Mother appeared above.
Daniel Van Ripper, you are a fool. I kissed Papa's fingers, for I loathed that spinning wheel. I'd be no toothless ghost, spinning and haunting little girls. I felt pity for such a spirit, and gratitude to have her example before me, steeling my resolve. Every night thereafter, I would leave a crust of bread for old Willow, and sleep with one eye open, in case she came to spin for me again.